Hey guys, Scott here. Nothing really big going on in the world of DBD, so I thought I would discuss the game I've been playing kind of off stream. And I wanted to talk about it because I think even if you don't care about the game, it's still an interesting discussion because I think Final Fantasy XIV is the only example of a game that I consider to be extremely good and filled with incredibly memorable moments that I can't recommend to anybody because of how boring the first like 80 hours is. I'm sure if you know anything about this game, you've heard that A Realm Reborn, which is the base version of the game, is just not that good. And it is not. It's basically a generic MMO. And then once you start getting to the expansions, it starts to become a really respectable story game that's also online. And it's incredible how they do that. But it's so hard for me to recommend this game because like I started and stopped A Realm Reborn maybe 5, 6 times. It took me a year to get through A Realm Reborn just because of how boring it is. And it's not even that it's that boring. It's just people hype the game so much that I was expecting more. To me, Final Fantasy XIV, the base game, which is A Realm Reborn, it's just like a generic MMO. It's like World of Warcraft, to be honest. It's just a lot of fetch quests, running back and forth, kill a boar, get its hide, and give it to a guy, teleport somewhere else, do that 70 more times until you beat it. There's a couple of cool story beats, and you meet all the characters that become extremely important, and a lot of the music is cool, but at the end of the day, it is a very generic MMO. And it wasn't really selling me, because I've already played WoW for 15 years. I don't want to do another one. I've already done that before. But once you get past that part, it transcends into not an MMO. I would not consider Final Fantasy XIV an MMO. It is a Final Fantasy game that occasionally you have friends to help you with on tough fights. And because of that, it allows you to be the main character, which allows the story to be so much better. And although it takes time to get to that point, once you get there, it's sort of unmatched in terms of actual MMOs because think about like every MMO you play, you're basically just like let's WoW again. You're just like, you're a champion of Azeroth. That's you're a champion. And that's cool. Like your character's important, but so is every other character that plays the game. That's not the case in this game. In this game, you are the main character. That's it. You're the most important person in the world. Fuck everybody else. There's other people that are important, obviously, but your title is the Warrior of Light. You're the most important character in the entire world. And due to the nature of how the story kind of works and in an MMO fashion, it flows naturally because even later there are storyline explanations as to how you have friends fight with you. But for the most part, it's just a character driven story, just like a single player Final Fantasy game. And because it's like that, it enables the story to be so much better than just a regular MMO where it's like, just go to a raid and just kill fucking the jailer. God, I don't even want to talk about how shitty WoW is. But all that being said, it's so hard to still recommend people play this game because you have to get through the MMO shitty boring part to get there. And you can get a skip. You can pay for a skip to get to the good stuff immediately, but it's pointless because the shitty stuff, it still has all of the characters and it makes all the future stuff extremely relevant. So if you don't have that knowledge, it's pointless. And you can probably watch lore recaps and stuff like that, and that's fine. But it's not the same. You're cheating yourself out of it. That's why people told me to just skip, and I said no. I'm going to take a year to finish this and get through it and do it right. And I'm glad I did because now all the characters I've spent hundreds of hours with, it's so much more impactful when they do something or something happens, and you have the history behind all of it. But yeah, all that being said, it's still hard to recommend the game because of the shit you have to go through. And for the record, if you're looking to get into like an MMO and like, you like WoW and you want to do some arena PvP, hop into some dungeons and stuff like that, this is not the game for you. I think the best way to look at this game is it's just an RPG. It's a story-driven RPG. If you're not looking for a story-driven RPG, you shouldn't play this game. If you want just like a generic MMO, WoW is still fine for that. But this is a story-driven game that you occasionally do things with friends. And like I said, I think that enables the story to be so much better. The way I look at it is the finales of each expansion are so good that it's basically just like the entire point of all the expansions is to get to the finale. I know that's a dumb sentence because that's the point of everything, but everything you do in every expansion culminates in like the most epic final bosses. Like, like when you in Final Fantasy VII, you've been playing the game for a long time and you finally get to the Northern Crater and you have the confrontation with Sephiroth and you're like, okay, this is it. It's like that, but like 4 times in a row with every expansion. They somehow managed to do that like over and over and over again. And God, like the cutscenes that happen and then the actual fights themselves, the actual mechanics in them, they make you feel like such a badass. So much more than like WoW or any other MMO that I played. You feel like an absolute badass when you play this game, especially in the finales. They prop up your character so much, and that's not really a feeling I get with any other MMO. I just feel like I'm a character in a game, and with Final Fantasy XIV, I feel like I am the main character in the game, and that's a huge difference. So, although I can't recommend the game to people because of how much shit you have to actually go through to get to the parts where it becomes incredible, I still think if you slog through it, you will absolutely be rewarded with some of the like coolest experiences ever, and just really in any game. So I am definitely a convert. I was shitting on this game for a long time, and again, rightfully so, because the parts I was going through were shit. And that's not to say that there's not some low points in even the later expansions like Heaven's Ward and Stormblood and Shadowbringers. It's not to say that there are not low points in them. There are a couple, like in Heaven's Ward, there's a couple of slow parts. In Stormblood, there's a couple of slow parts. Shadowbringers is pretty much perfect. I don't think there are any slow parts there, but for the most part, they're not perfect. But I mean, no game is. There's slow parts in every single game, but the culmination of every expansion, like the whole point is to just get to that final moment, and the final moments are so amazing every time, but you have to get through the game to earn that final moment. And when you do, it's just always worth it. Like, I'm still listening to the themes of half of these fights. I don't want to spoil anything. It sucks making this video because I can't talk about any of the actual specifics of anything, but something that this game does so well too is not only just the music itself is great, but musical timing to the fights. This is something MMOs don't really ever do. It's a single player thing. You'll have like a swell in the orchestra when something triumphant happens. That happens in raids with players and stuff. And they time it so well that it really just feels like you're playing a single player Final Fantasy game until you realize there's 7 players next to you as well. And I think that's just an incredibly impressive feat for an MMO. I've been listening to the themes like for just like, yeah, they're extremely good. I think the villain in Shadowbringers is arguably the best Final Fantasy villain. He's like right up there with Kefka, Sephiroth, which again, for an MMO, you don't think that's possible. You don't think you can have characters that are that good in an MMO because of the nature of MMOs, it doesn't really allow for that, but somehow they do it. The main villain for Shadowbringers is I can't spoil anything in the off chance you do actually play it. But he's basically like, he's a very Thanos-like villain where he's obviously doing evil things, but also you're kind of like, no, I get it though. And that's always a sign of a well-written character, I think, when it's not like, oh, this guy's evil and he's just bad. You're like, he's got some pretty good points though. And that's the thing, A Realm Reborn doesn't have that. Everyone in A Realm Reborn is just a generic, shitty, written, bad villain. It's so hard for me to recommend this game, but I also want to recommend this game if you get past the shitty part. I also recommend you don't skip. Just take a year take 5 years to finish it. It's not going to go anywhere. Like I said, this is mostly a single player game that you can play with friends occasionally. The story is a single player thing. So take your time with it. Don't skip it, but be prepared for immense boredom for the first 80 hours because God, it's really bad. But when you get past it, oh man, it's good. I don't know. I just want to rant about it because I just got through Shadowbringers, the main story for 5.0, and man, I've rewatched people's reactions to that so many times, and it's still so good every single time I see just the ending to it. So I both recommend and can't recommend this game at all. It's very confusing. All right.